Hey, I'm Sam. Welcome to Brickwall Pictures. The generally accepted consensus in regards to HBO's True Detective is that Season 1 was phenomenal, Season 2 dropped the ball and was a totally fumbled mess, and then Season 3, while a bit less talked about, perhaps a bit less in the zeitgeist, was mostly considered a successful return to form. But I strongly disagree with that consensus. I agree that Season 1 was phenomenal. But I disagree about the other two seasons. I don't think Season 3 was bad or anything, but I also don't consider it some big step back up. I have a couple major issues with Season 3, which I'll get into later, but I mostly want to sing the praises of the highly underrated second season of this show. To misquote Mitch Hedberg, that season was better than you acted. So stick with me as I look back at a season of television that I believe truly deserves more respect. It's not perfect. There are issues with it. I want to start by covering these issues and setting the stage for why Season 2 was so poorly received. Season 2 hit the air just a year after the first season, capitalizing on all the buzz of the series. There's nothing noteworthy here. This is how TV typically functions, but it wouldn't remain the norm for this particular series. After the poor reception of Season 2, the show went dark. The show was always dark. I'm saying the show went off the air for an extended period of time. Instead of Season 3 arriving 1 year later, it took 4 years to materialize. And for a while there, it was uncertain whether or not the show would be returning at all. Season 2 almost killed the series, and much of its failure landed on the shoulders of creator Nic Pizzolatto. It was unclear if True Detective would return for a third season, and it was unclear if Pizzolatto would still be in charge. He went from practically coming out of nowhere and instantly becoming one of the most acclaimed and in-demand writers in television to having his status as a showrunner put in jeopardy. He also had a deal with FX, an overall deal that he moved from HBO to FX, and that ended up getting dropped and they didn't end up making anything together. He left that contract entirely. So it wasn't just the poor reception from critics and audiences. Pizzolatto's professional reputation was also suffering. He had a reputation for being intense, sometimes far too intense for people, in a professional capacity, and he became somewhat notorious for being difficult to work with and for micromanaging every aspect of the show, despite not being a director. Some considered micromanaging to just display his strong attention to detail, which benefited the show, but plenty of others considered it invasive and stifling, getting in the way of other people doing their jobs. One important person who felt this way was Cary Joji Fukunaga, who directed the entire first season. Fukunaga's direction was one of the biggest strengths of that first season. He's an excellent filmmaker, and he brought a real cinematic style to this television series in a time where that was less common than it is today. It's important to remember how big of a deal it was that two huge movie stars, Matthew McConaughey and Woody Harrelson, were choosing to star in a TV series. That happens all the time now, but True Detective was a bit of a trailblazer in that regard, with many movie stars previously considering television to be a lesser medium. Prestige television like Breaking Bad had started a seismic shift in the industry a couple years earlier, and True Detective sealed the deal. Fukunaga and Pizzolatto entered the series with an agreement that they would work as equal partners, one writer, one director, for all 8 episodes, both of which are rare in television, having just one of each. Usually there's a whole rogues gallery that rotates through. Fukunaga chose not to return as the director of Season 2, citing his creative differences and difficulties working with Pizzolatto, who began overstepping his bounds more and more and erasing their agreed-on equal footing. The absence of Fukunaga, or in fact any singular directorial vision, is something that hurts Season 2, which took the more traditional route of having multiple directors cycling through different episodes. Season 3 attempted to return to the singular directorial vision approach, but if you paid attention to the credits of each episode, you would know that that plan didn't end up working out. Once upon a time, Jeremy Saulnier, the director of Blue Ruin and Green Room, would have directed the entire third season of True Detective. This would have been great, in my opinion. I consider Saulnier one of the most exciting, relatively new filmmakers on the scene, and I've greatly enjoyed everything he's made, including Hold the Dark, which a lot of people seem to really not jive with. It worked for me. I feel like I got what he was doing. Saulnier ended up only directing the first 2 episodes of the third season before stepping away, again citing some difficulties on set, but also citing scheduling concerns. His reasons for departure were kept a bit more amicable and a bit more under wraps than Fukunaga's departure. And I want to be clear that I'm not saying this to disparage any of the other directors who took over after Saulnier left, or any of the directors who helmed episodes in Season 2. All I'm saying is that a singular directorial vision provides something that a hodgepodge of voices just can't. And it also speaks to some of the messiness that was going on behind the scenes. When I said earlier that there was nothing noteworthy about Season 2 hitting the air a year after Season 1, that was a little bit of a lie. For most shows, there wouldn't be anything noteworthy about that. But True Detective is a unique animal. Beyond it being notable that Pizzolatto wrote the entire first season single-handed without a writer's room, it's also notable that he wrote the first 4 episodes in full and meticulously planned out the full season in exacting detail long before HBO picked up the series. Pizzolatto started writing Season 1 a full 4 years before the series eventually debuted. That extended time spent crafting the characters and narrative and rewriting, shaping, forming the season, it shows in the final product. With Season 2 being written on a drastically shorter time frame, it shows. Even still, I think it turned out quite a lot better than many gave it credit for. I don't think it's just a complete disaster that ruined the show, far from it. I think there's another phenomenal season of television encased within it, buried just beneath the surface. With a bit more time in the oven, this could have been refined to a point of greatness. I think it's still quite good anyway. Here's a quote. "Nick is a really good writer, but I do think he needs to be edited down." That's a direct quote from Kerry Joji Fukunaga on working with Nic Pizzolatto when speaking to The Hollywood Reporter about working on Season 1. Though it caused a lot of behind-the-scenes friction, Fukunaga was there to balance Pizzolatto out in that first season. Plus, that 4-year period of time writing ahead of production definitely allowed more room for reflection, editing, and rewriting to really hone in on the core of the story and characters and trim all that excess. When Season 2 comes along on a shorter time frame and without the guiding opposition from Fukunaga, Pizzolatto's writing went much more unchecked, to its detriment. Here's another quote from Fukunaga. "My struggle with him was to take some of these long dialogue scenes and put some air into them. That kind of corrective measure would be welcome in Season 2. Pizzolatto writes some fantastic, hard-boiled dialogue, but he does get a little lost in the sauce sometimes. He's quite a verbose fella, and his characters sometimes flex vocabularies that it doesn't feel right for them to have. Like a conversation between 2 tough guys where they're both throwing around the word apoplectic."
Oh, frankly, I'm apoplectic.
I'm feeling a little apoplectic myself.
I mean, that's a little tough to buy, that they're throwing around the word apoplectic. Come on. I mean, yeah, it works in that conversation. The word's used correctly, but like, would they be using it? I think they'd probably just say they're angry. This season is filled with wall-to-wall, capital D dialogue, and that often steps outside the realm of feeling natural in the slightest. However, it does feel more in line with the hard-boiled noirs of days past that clearly serve as a major influence for the show. If you can suspend your disbelief in the naturalism department, then there's a lot of fun, clever dialogue to be found here. When people call Season 3 return to form for the series, what I think they actually mean, perhaps subconsciously, is that it feels like Season 1 again. This is actually one of the biggest issues I have with the 3rd season, personally, and part of why I greatly enjoyed Season 2 while many others didn't. I love when a show has the guts to evolve and deliver something different. And that feels perfectly natural in what is essentially an anthology series like True Detective, where each season tells a different self-contained story. Let's do some quick comparisons to really shine a light on how much of a departure Season 2 was. Seasons 1 and 3 both follow 2 detective partners. Season 2 follows 4 protagonists, only one of whom is a standard detective, with the other 3 being a gangster, a sheriff's department sergeant, and a highway patrol officer. Seasons 1 and 3 are set in the rural South, both of them. Season 2 is set in the fictional industrial city of Vinci, California. Seasons 1 and 3 both utilize a framing device and non-chronological storytelling as they jump backwards and forwards to different points in time. Season 2 has no framing device and moves forward in a strictly linear fashion. Even the genres are different, with Seasons 1 and 3 both being psychological mysteries, while Season 2 is more of a crime thriller. There really isn't even a mystery in Season 2. I mean, there kind of is, and there is a murder investigation that sets the plot in motion and brings the characters together, but it's pushed so far into the background by this complex web of crime that forces its way to center stage. I love how much of a departure the 2nd season was. That works for me. And I find how closely Season 3 hewed to the 1st season To be kind of disappointing, honestly. It feels very much like the show was forcibly returned to the template of that first season after the failure that was season 2. To me, season 3 felt safe, like it was afraid to take chances, and that hurt it significantly for me. To me, the framing device and non-chronological storytelling in season 3 felt compulsory, like it was only there because people liked that about season 1. It didn't feel like it served the story. I think that story would have been better off told in a linear fashion, whereas season 1, the non-chronological storytelling really is a boon to it. But I do think it makes sense that many people found it to be a return to form. Return being the operative word there. It feels like a natural season 2 to True Detective, whereas the actual season 2 feels like a completely different television show. And by that token, if this season of television was given some other title and had no connection to the True Detective name that everyone fell in love with in the first season, then I firmly believe it would have been much more warmly received. If this season wasn't a season, and it was just a show that hit HBO, a gritty crime saga titled Vinci or something, I think it would have been a hit. Miscalculated audience perceptions factored into the negative reception that this show received. If you were a fan of True Detective Season 1 and you were disappointed by Season 2, then I urge you to give it another shot and maybe pretend that it's an unrelated standalone miniseries. The plot is so jam-packed and dense that this is a season of television that rewards rewatches anyway. I've seen the entire season multiple times, and while I enjoyed it a lot on the first time through already, I loved it the second time. It's kind of like The Big Lebowski. I know that seems like a bizarre comparison, but just, stick with me for a moment here. With The Big Lebowski, the actual noir crime plot at play and all of the machinations of its large web of characters, they're so complex and intricately linked. Yet at the same time, the details of that crime plot and the connection between all these dealings of these numerous characters, they're shoved way to the background. And it's tough to track every single detail on a single viewing. True Detective Season 2 is the same way. The main difference is that the humor in The Big Lebowski takes center stage, and it keeps it an enjoyable experience without the need for the viewer to unravel that complex plot. The film doesn't really expect you to track every little detail on a first watch. Following that entire background crime plot in minute detail is something that rewards repeat viewings that isn't necessary to enjoy it on a first viewing. True Detective has a similar level of background intricacy, except the difference being that it does seem to expect or even demand more from its audience to get the desired experience. To put it simply, the crime plot of the season is perhaps dense to a fault. I still found it compelling on the first watch, but far more rewarding on a rewatch, once you have some information from later on in your mind near the start. But let's forget about rewatches for a second. Maybe you skip this season altogether because of its reputation. Let me give you some concrete reasons to give it a chance. To quickly touch on what's been covered so far, 1, the crime plot is compelling and well written. Just don't go in expecting a mystery series necessarily. The season drops that pretense pretty quickly. 2, the hard-boiled dialogue is great when it isn't overwrought. And now to bridge into some new territory. 3, the performances, especially Colin Farrell as Ray Velcoro.
What happened to your shoes?
Ray, goddammit. They took his shoes out of his gym locker.
And what? What, shit on him?
They cut him up, that's it. Christ, man, come on, this isn't good for him.
Who was it, boy?
Ray, stop it. Let's talk later, somewhere else.
God, you fat pussy. You give me a kid's name right now or I'll pull down your pants and I'll spank you in front of the fucking cheerleading squad. Don't look at him! You look at me!
I love Colin Farrell in general, and it seems like plenty of other people do, so I don't understand why so many people are sleeping on this performance. He is fantastic in this role, and it's a great complex character for him to really sink his teeth into. He's crooked as shit and a pretty terrible person in most regards, but there's a ton of nuance to this character, and Farrell brings such intensity to this part.
This man's with the police. He says he has something to ask you.
You like to bully kids? Ass, pen.
Hold on, what is this?
You 12 years old and you're already evil as fuck.
Hey! Oh, you can't talk!
You gonna run out on your dad? Take a look. Hey, he's doing this for you. Stop. I thought that got you off, kid. Seeing people in pain. If you ever bully or hurt anybody again, I'll come back and butt fuck your father with your mom's headless corpse on this goddamn lawn. 12 years old, my ass. Fuck you.
Whenever he's on screen, the show is magnetic. Rachel McAdams is also pretty great. Her backstory and family history is intensely interesting, and it leads directly to other memorable performances in the form of David Morse in a supporting role. The one issue I have with her character is that there are numerous setups with her being a knife-fighting expert, and then the show doesn't really deliver on the caliber of payoff warranted by all that setup. It isn't a completely failed Chekhov's gun. There is a payoff technically, it just isn't a satisfying payoff with so much build-up coming before it. This is something that I chalk up to the rushed writing phase of season 2. Nailing the setup and payoff needed a little more time in the oven, it seems. If there's a weak link on the cast, most people pointed to Vince Vaughn. I actually think if there's a weak link, it's Taylor Kitsch. I haven't loved him in any roles I've seen him in, and an actor with more charisma could maybe do a bit more on this part. Even still though, I don't think he's outright bad, just a bit bland. Surprisingly, I actually think it's the writing that lets this character down more than the performance. I think he does a fine job. I think Kitsch does a fine job. But the character feels like one too many players on the chessboard, especially in this big extended subplot of his, which is the only part of the season that feels underwritten to me. Or maybe it's just overly cliche and a little out of place. If you pluck this character out of the season altogether, the whole piece would get tighter and more focused. And again, I think that goes back to the rushed production pipeline. At a certain point, it feels like, well, what do we do with this guy? He doesn't really fit into the narrative as a integral component to it. And this is part of what I mean when I say that I think there's a fantastic season of television buried underneath some messiness. It's like the script for every episode of the season just needed one more draft to really refine and get it ready. Now, Vince Vaughn, on the other hand, I actually think he's quite good in this show. He took so much flack for this role, and it's important to note that this was really his first departure into a darker and more serious role after spending so many years working exclusively in the comedy genre. Just like people weren't prepared for the second season of True Detective to be such a wild departure from the first season, they also weren't prepared for such a tonal mix-up from Vaughn. After impressing greatly with his roles in Brawl and Cell Block 99 and Dragged Across Concrete, I think this is a Vaughn performance worth reevaluating. And his character, Frank Semyon, is also one of the most compelling characters in the whole season. As the gangster crime boss of this season, there's much more going on with this guy than meets the eye. Frank and Ray are the two clear standout characters of this season, and they are the reason to watch this season. The last area that I want to highlight that I feel has been criminally overlooked is the action. Season 1 had that great tracking shot action sequence that bridged the two halves of the show together, which, by the way, was one of the creative disagreements on set, with that one-shot approach being a Fukunaga idea and Pizzolatto being against it. Luckily, Fukunaga stuck to his guns on that one. Outside of that sequence and a couple of brief moments, including the climax, True Detective doesn't have much in terms of action. I don't think anyone would categorize it as an outright action series. The second season, however, placed a bit more emphasis on action. There are several action sequences this time around, and I think that they're all executed brilliantly. They display a particular type of action that is a far cry from the exciting, fun, cathartic type of action that you find in like the John Wick movies, for example, with intricate choreography and impressive physical performances. It's not that at all. Instead, what True Detective Season 2 delivers is the gritty and realistic type of action. This season consistently delivers on the type of action that makes you flinch and fear for the characters. The type of shootout that feels more tense, immediate, and destructive. It's a type of action that movies like Dragged Across Concrete and Sicario excel at. Something that makes these shootouts in Season 2 feel so tense is the palpable sense of danger, and it isn't always present in a typical movie shootout. It feels like anyone could be grievously wounded or killed at any moment, whereas many shootouts feature protagonists protected by plot armor. A shootout involving Rust and Marty early on in Season 1 wouldn't have that sense of danger. Disregarding the other plot implications of killing off one of your two leads, the simple matter of the flash-forward framing device lets you know from the get-go that both of these guys lived through everything happening in the bulk of the narrative, because it's in the past. And this diffuses much of the danger and removes any threat of them dying. Season 2 doesn't have that safety net. And with 4 protagonists in the mix, the show could afford to kill off a couple of them at any instant without bringing the entire narrative to a screeching halt. The danger therein feels real, and they feel expendable. These shootouts feel grounded and real, but they also feel distinctive and unlike the action sequences I've seen elsewhere. The bullet vests utilized in the forest shootout, and the way this earlier shootout progresses through the street and into sub-locations and has our characters panicking and running out of ammo, they both feel fresh and make the sequences stand out. These action sequences don't make up the bulk of the show or anything, and I don't think anyone goes into True Detective for the action explicitly, but these sequences are great and they do add a lot to my enjoyment of the show. I've seen some people write off these action sequences just altogether, but I think that they do comprise a substantial element of this season, and I think they're exceptionally well executed. So all in all, this is far from being a perfect season of television, but it's a damn bit better than its poor reception would indicate. Give it a shot if you overlooked it before, or give it another shot if you were disappointed by the second True Detective season. Approach it as a standalone crime thriller miniseries and see if you enjoyed any more. You might not, but there's a chance you will.
Guess I was wrong. It was today.
Old times, Frank. I saved you. You're like my son.
Thanks for watching. This video is part of my Deserves More Respect series, where I go out of my way to put my neck on the line and defend movies that have been historically trashed by the general public and other critics. So check out more of my Deserves More Respect videos. You can find a playlist on the screen somewhere. Check out more videos in that playlist if you want more like this. And I also do, general video essays, movie reviews, tier lists, all kind of stuff. So subscribe right here to Brickwall Pictures if you want more.